Welcome to THA Talks, for free thought and open minds. Hello people, coming to you from London, UK and out to the universe. I'm Paul Obitelli and this is edition 56 of THA Talks, brought to you by Theo Humanist Arts. Here at THA Talks we bring you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our sticky mitts on. Just go to www.thattalks.com to listen to or to download all our free content. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to get hold of us and send us any of your thoughts or ideas for the show, maybe a request for a potential guest, you can do so by emailing info@thattalks.com. That's info@thattalks.com. Also, if you're digging what we're doing here, you can subscribe using our RSS feed or through various podcast directories like iTunes or Stitcher. Again, you can visit our website for more details on that. Okay, so the number is 56. That's how many editions we managed to get up during 2014, and this is our final edition of the year before we enter into 2015 with a brand new schedule and new ideas and inspirations for the years to come. This will also be the last time that I reach to the other side of London and call out for a surge from a dramaturge in 2014, I might add. He will still be here in 2015, but David, it's been emotional.
It's coming to the end of the year, the end of a cycle. Oh my heavens, we're off to see the wizard, the wonderful Wizard of Oz. We hear he is a whiz of a whiz, if ever a whiz there was. That's sort of how I feel, and not at the same time.
How's your cough and all that? Is it still with you?
It is still with me, and I'm still fighting it, but I hope to be coughing less and less over the next few days.
Oh, that's good. I'm sure it'll clear up soon, but this is it. This is the last show for 2014, our first year.
The party's over. It's time to call it a day, but not, of course, because we've got some good interviews coming up.
Yeah. I've got a big schedule I've got to sort out over this week. So we're looking forward to getting next year all organised and ready. This week we will be speaking with Thomas Joseph Brown. He's an independent researcher who's into spiritual science, metaphysics, light and colour, free energy, lost science, electro-therapeutics and much more. So this sounds like it's going to be very in-depth, David.
It reminds me, if I'm completely honest, of certain people I went to university with. Yes, 1,000 years ago, blah, blah, blah. Yes, Noah was just getting out the ark, blah, blah, blah. But he's one of those people that's developed a number of engrossing fields of endeavour. He's mastered them, to my mind. And, you know, I don't know why we haven't had him on the show previously, because he's a new contact for us, but fascinating, Paul, and he fits our ideal behind this show perfectly.
Yeah, very much so, and I will add he was recommended through our listeners, so thank you. I think that was Ryan that sent that request, and a very good idea that was too, Ryan, so thank you. Shall we get to it?
Ryan, we love you, and let's go.
Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the show.
Hello, Paul. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me on.
That's our pleasure. You did actually come to us via our listeners who recommended you for the show. So we really appreciate your quick response to us and the fact you've come on the show for us today. We've been really looking forward to it. You also cover a lot of in-depth subjects. It's deep stuff. And I think we're going to have to kind of introduce it all today and go with the flow with it all. Maybe what you could, to start off, if you could give our listeners a synopsis on who you are and how you got into all this work.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, I guess my sort of public work started about 1985 when I took over Borderland Sciences Research Foundation in California from Riley Crabb. And I edited the Journal of Borderland Research for 10 years there, from basically 85 to 95, when I moved to New Zealand for family reasons. And through the vagaries of life, continental drift sort of drifted away from that, although I kept up my research on it. And well, what Borderland was, it was different things to different people, but basically it was about sort of probing at the borders of perception and concepts. And some people saw it as free energy, some people saw it as metaphysical. To me, I suppose I came into an awakening at that point, because my background had been in sort of Eastern mysticism, Western occultism. You know, I'd studied through the Vajrayana and Aleister Crowley and Kenneth Grant, who was actually a friend. I used to correspond with him and went through a lot of that. But when I took over Borderlands, I connected with a man named Trevor Constable, who was a brilliant weather engineer. He carried on from Wilhelm Reich's work, and he basically directed me towards Goethe's work, Goethe's theory of color, metamorphoses of plants, and Rudolf Steiner's concept of the ethers. And what I found in that was in sort of probing the borderland of perception, the borderland of understanding, you know, what are the true paradigms of, you know, our consensus reality? Are they real or not? I found the Goethean method to be what I could call a pragmatic metaphysics. We're actually able to make connections between the seen and the unseen in a structural fashion, you could say, which is sort of what Trevor Constable would do with his weather engineering. You know, he built on Wilhelm Reich's work with the cloudbuster, manipulating the orgone energy of the atmosphere. But Trevor, he was the chief radio officer for Matson Lines, and on their flagship, the SS Maui, between L.A. and Honolulu, basically shipping back and forth. So he was the official weather station. So he was doing experiments on the bridge of the ship. So, you know, wasn't sort of just like a backyard experimenter thinking he'd try something. You know, this was very professional. He had 3 and 10 centimeter radars, you know, wet and dry bulb thermometers. Everything was recorded on time-lapse video. But the interesting thing is one of the captains, because Trevor was using running water through tubes, you know, to compensate for the water grounding that Reich used. And one of the Commodores told him, said, "Look, you're a smart man. I don't want to see this water going here anymore." So Trevor figured he started going into sacred geometric orgone accumulators, which are basically capacitors, you know, metal and organic and inorganic material layered in sacred geometric shapes. And these effects, these little devices have profound effects over vast areas of the atmosphere. So that's just an example of what I would call practical metaphysics. I never really did weather engineering experiments. At the time, I was quite into biodynamic gardening. So we would actually use these geometric weather guns of Trevor's in the garden for energizing plants. And of course, at the same time, we were doing research in electro-therapeutic devices like the multi-wave oscillator. And one of the people in our foundation had developed a golden ratio, basically antenna system, which we found actually affected plant growth quite favorably. So, yeah, I suppose that's in general. We will look through a lot of different things. It'd be hard to put it all into a nutshell right now, Paul.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, regarding the orgone energy, because I remember there still is a bit of a craze where you've got the resin and the crystals and the metal, and you create these little kind of pyramid-shaped ornaments that are meant to give off some energy. Does that represent something valid from Reich's research, or is that kind of a novelty thing? I've never really had a chance to really research that myself and find out what it's all about. Have you been into that sort of stuff, that orgonite making and so on?
I've watched it just to keep an eye on it. To me, it's sort of an offshoot. It's not really pure orgone. In essence, it is probably going to generate some energy. I don't know how much of it is actually caused by people's minds, because we were working with real orgone accumulators. Like I had an orgone accumulator in Northern California. It was actually built by Bob McCullough, who was one of Wilhelm Reich's research assistants and was a member of Borderlands, and he was one of Trevor's early partners in the weather engineering work. Now, if you sat in that, you could actually feel the energy streaming off the walls. And we had like a little orgone shooter, and you could put. I remember my late wife, she cut her. We were chopping wood because we were in the bush, but she cut her arm with a splinter came off an axe, and we basically put an orgone shooter on it for a couple hours, and the thing healed up amazingly fast. I've never seen any sort of effects like that with the so-called orgonite. So,
well, it seems,
and it's sort of scattered. The stuff's just scattered in the resin. Technically, it's going to have some effect, but whether or not it's going to have the profound effect, because overall, there's this sort of thesis of psychotronics. Our minds are actually quite powerful and can create these effects in a placebo effect sort of way.
Yeah, Wilhelm Reich, he was a bit of a victim with regards to being silenced. There seemed to be a lot of effort to suppress his work and to oppress him. What are your views on him as a researcher and what the work he'd done? I mean, this energy that he was researching and going into, it seemed to open a can of worms, didn't it?
Oh, totally. No, I think his actual research was brilliant. Not that I agreed with him on everything. In some ways, he's probably far more intelligent than me in actually understanding where his work went. But having looked at it over the years, there were certain things where he tried to equate orgone with electrostatics, whereas I found, that there is a relationship, but they're not the same thing. Little things like that. But overall, I think what's most important with his work, and there is no doubt about the atmospheric energy and the biological energy. I've seen all that, in devices. I've seen it work in the atmosphere. I've had a couple decades of watching Trevor Constable's weather engineering work, where just, like I say, little geometric, a little tube 20 inches long on an airplane, flown for 20 minutes, and you basically get, downpour out of nowhere, unexpected. So the energy's there, but I think the important thing about Reich's work was his whole thing about characterological armoring, and how, a lot of, cancer and different diseases that we have now are not caused really by the toxins and things that are held in the body, but by the characterological armoring that holds them in the body, blockages of the life energy, which overall, the more blocked that gets, then that leads to ultimately to like the fascist character or the sort of totalitarian regime we sort of see forming on the planet.
Yeah.
Reich basically warned us about that, and we can see it happening.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of leads towards a question that I had in my notes for this show. I mean, since sort of the early 2000s, around the September 11 Twin Towers attacks, for me there seems to have been, well, I think everyone talks about it, a big shift in people's mindsets and their consciousness. The world just seems to have changed so drastically since that kind of point to where we are now. I mean, is this simply politics, or do you think there's something deeper to that?
Well, no, definitely. That's an expression of a long-term thing. I mean, I generally don't like to talk about conspiracy stuff because I don't want to be labeled as such. But at the same time, I do pay attention, and I've been paying attention to these things since basically the 70s. So, I mean, if you look at the 9/11, the people behind it, you basically trace them back. They were the same people behind the Kennedy assassination, and going back before that into other things. I mean, there's certainly a dark cabal, or a group of different ones that sort of seem to fight against each other at some times as well. But to me, right, this gets into a deep sort of, spiritual, characterological structure, because you look at it all different ways. You see around the world all these different sort of freeman movements and lose the name and sovereign citizens. And these are all people that they know something's wrong. They know the laws don't really apply, but the system is just so big and powerful, it doesn't matter if you're right, you get rolled. I had a good friend, Paul Mitchell. He just got out of federal prison after a year of what they call diesel therapy. They moved him every week. 53 times in a year they moved him. His whole charge was obstruction of justice for filing Freedom of Information Act things, requesting judges' credentials and finding out the judges were sitting without credentials. So what do? They lock the guy up for a year and harass him. It doesn't matter, right or wrong. It doesn't really matter. So to me, it's not about whether or not you're going to beat things on the law. I look at this overall in a global sense as part of our spiritual awakening and trying to overcome this intense society-wide characterological armoring that's developed. And we can get deeper if we look at like Rudolf Steiner's work. You know, a lot of people don't realize Steiner was quite into electricity and the development of electricity. And I once had an old translator tape of a lecture that got away. It was on the Templars, Faust, and electricity. And Steiner had this whole thing about, you know, just because the way the Templars were set upon and done in, and that this had the whole thing to do with the way we actually developed electricity and use it. And of course, most people think electricity is just stuff that runs down wires, but like Tesla developed the longitudinal faster than light electricity, which is basically extraluminal. And if that had been developed, we would have a different society these days. But the whole electrical sciences and everything was basically squashed 100 years ago. And the true natural philosophy underlying that was basically wiped out. You know, a lot of people look at the Carnegie Endowment as a great thing, putting up libraries, but they basically pulled all the good stuff and put in what they wanted you to believe, you know, all the relativistic science and things along those lines. So there's been a mass manipulation of sort of consciousness and perception of reality. You know, basically, you look back, it's been going on for hundreds of years, if not longer. We're just at a technological sharp edge of it right now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I definitely feel it myself. I describe it basically as it seems people are getting kind of more open-minded and closed-minded at the same time. It's like you can either go one way, you can either go with it and just really be open-minded, or you can just really close your mind and sort of hang on to the old way of thinking, so to speak, you know?
Oh, totally. No, I see both. You know, I've got friends in both camps. And, you know, the thing is one of the things, too, is, you know, a lot of young people, and it's amazing, there's a lot of young people coming online that are just really know something's up, and they're plowing into all these alternative ideas and sacred geometry and free energy and trying to understand. But I've noticed, and this is something I've noticed over the decades of dealing with people, is people find something that it's like an open door to them that shows them that there is a reality beyond the consensus reality they've sort of been programmed. But then they adhere to that, and they kind of go off on these tangents, and just so you see these little camps of people want to believe things, such as the orgonite. You know, I know people carry orgonite things in their pocket, and they don't have a clue about Wilhelm Reich's work, right? They just bought something off the net because it sounded good. So, it's, you know, to find the people with the deep enough intellect to probe through all these ideas, you know, that's what I'm always on the search for, just to have great conversations and see what people are thinking.
Yeah.
And what is the real world view?
Yeah. I mean, what I'm finding is there's a lot of stuff on the internet at the moment, a lot of mind-opening information, and you can either take it and learn from it, make of it what you will, and learn from it, or not. But what I find a lot of people doing, they're kind of fearing it, being that they think it's spread by this group or that group, the Freemasons or these guys or those guys. And they're sort of rejecting it, you know, oh, this is just to attack Christianity, or this is just for this or that. And generally people basically they don't want to be removed from the reality they're in, even if it's quite bad for some people. And it's getting past that, I find. It's, you know, some people grasp it, others don't seem to want to.
Oh, exactly. Exactly. Well, just for example, here in New Zealand, they just passed a law. I mean, you get ticketed for 1 kilometer over the limit now. I mean, they're really putting the screws down. You know, New Zealand's always been a test case. And I've been reading, like, you know, people's comments on Facebook, and they'll go, oh, well, just drive slower, whatever, you know, get over it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you know, it's just like, you know, they put the screw in, people go, oh, whatever. Okay, we'll just drive slower now. Rather than saying, well, wait a minute, one kilometer, you know, the speedometers aren't even that accurate. How do you even know? You know, but the thing is sure, people react to different things, and it's really hard because there is a lot of disinformation, misinformation, you know, intentional things put out. And that's why I advocate keeping an open mind. You know, one of my good friends, Vince Gaddis, he was the researcher who actually discovered and coined the Bermuda Triangle. Vince was a great researcher, 40s, 50s, 60s. He coined the term Bermuda Triangle in his book Invisible Horizons, came out, Chilton Publishers, in '65. Actually rescued Vince from a nursing home in California. He lived with us for about 8 years there before he passed away. But he always used to say, he used to admonish me, he'd go, keep an open mind until all the facts are in. He goes, don't make any determinations, until you're absolutely sure. So, and I've always kept that in mind, that, no matter what, nothing you can really believe is absolute. We know that from physics, even I agree with a lot of the modern sort of physics. I believe that's sort of another sort of cul-de-sac of thinking. But, and because it's like with worldview, if you look back at the Copernican revolution, before that, everybody thought, well, Earth is a center, sun goes around, all that. Exactly as you perceive, exactly as the plants react to, exactly as life reacts to. Copernicus didn't really discover anything per se by looking through a telescope. Galileo looked through the telescope, saw the moons of Jupiter, and the hypothesis arose then that maybe the planets are going around the sun. But it was quite a shift. There was a lot of arguments at the time of which worldview was correct. And there was an experiment proposed that, well, it's real easy to figure out if the Earth is going around the sun, then look, let's just take a telescope. We can sight a star, fill a tube with water, you get an angle change, then you go around 6 months later, you do the experiment again. So the difference in the angle change when you fill a tube with water, the angle of aberration, they'll give you the parallax, and they could figure out the distance to the stars. Well, it took them 100 years before they got around to that experiment. It was actually George Bedell Airy, who was a royal astronomer, finally did the experiments about 100 years after Copernicus, and there was no angle change. But by then, the Copernican worldview had pretty much set in. Most people believed that the Earth went around the sun, even though they never experienced that. So when they came up with the negative results of the experiment, which was supposed to prove whether the Earth moved or the sun moved, and if you look at it from that point of view, the experiment proved that it was the sun that moved and not the Earth. But yet that was no longer an acceptable thing. And that came up with the whole concept of, well, the Earth must be pulling an ether around and the light's following the ether. And so that started this whole history of ether drift experiments, which finally, supposedly, they didn't measure it, which they actually did, but officially they didn't. And then that gave rise to relativity, which was promoted to make sure people didn't understand Tesla's work. But if you go back, then I got into Steiner's work, and he talked about the anthroposophical worldview. And fundamentally, he was what you would call a geocentrist. He believed that the Earth was the center of a life body. Not necessarily that it wasn't going around the sun, but it was going around the sun, but the sun was also going around it in a higher order space. So what you find is rather than being one view or the other view, both views are actually mutually compatible. It's just that it takes a greater understanding. And this is what Steiner called sort of creating new organs of cognition and consciousness. What he felt is what he called it the Goethean method, what he had learned from, because he edited Goethe's scientific archives at the Weimar Republic, which is where he kind of got his whole background in that stuff.
Okay, well, I think it's time. David, are you on hand? I think it's time for you to chime in here.
I'm on hand, and I used to be a member of the Anthroposophical Society, so I share Thomas's interest in Rudolf Steiner. I also, when I was doing a little digging for this show, noticed he used to sell books to Manly P. Hall. What an amazing thing to have on a CV.
Listen, I say I had a couple of Manly P. Hall's autographs, but I cashed some of them.
My friend, I'm just jealous you've got the autographs. What can I say?
No, I've got an autographed edition of his, the Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Oh,
brilliant book.
Oh, I'm coming to visit you. What can I say? My heavens!
Anytime. It's summer here too.
Now, be careful. Be careful. I'm freezing my proverbial off in South London. You be careful. Oh, look, Paul and Thomas. I mean, Thomas, you must come back on the show at some point. You're a mine of information. You're you're a sage in so many areas. All I think we can do realistically this evening is introduce you to our listeners and have a nice, good old chinwag, because you cover so many areas. I don't think it will be genuinely possible to do justice to all of them. The Goetheanum, Goethe, Steiner, I mean, as far as I recall, Steiner's doctoral thesis was highly influenced by Goethe. I want to discuss something of Goethe's theories of colour with you, if that's possible. I know that's one of your fields. My own occult teacher, Jesse Thompson, many, many years ago, may the spirits rest him, who had been sort of a highly placed officer in military intelligence during the war. He used to give lectures at the British Museum. He worked with colour healing. And he certainly got me to admire Goethe, you know, as an undergraduate, blah, blah, blah. I read Goethe, but he got me to appreciate the work of Goethe on a much deeper level. I actually spoke to the World Public Forum a few years ago in Weimar and visited the grave of Goethe, you know, this humbling experience. But I suppose since you're such an authority on Goethe, where am I heading with this? What do you think is the essence of Goethe's thinking? What is its place in the modern world, and has any of it been surpassed?
Well, no, I don't think it's actually been enacted. My understanding, I wouldn't call myself an expert in it. I still sort of struggle to explain the metamorphoses of plants, although I do understand it. I do understand the color theory quite well. I think, to me, the essence of what it is it's the ability to look at something like, say, the way he developed his plant morphology, theory, was to actually watch the plants over time, rather than looking at the plant at one particular point and say, this is the plant. You know, he looked at like seed, shoot, stem, leaf, blossom, fruit. They're all, I mean, like the stem doesn't gradually grow into the leaf. The stem stops growing, then the leaf comes out. It's a metamorphic stage. And I believe it was Ernst Lehrs in his book Man or Matter, which was one of my first real introductions to this line of thinking. And he discussed that, and I don't remember how exactly he discussed it, but my feeling after reading that is that if you look at quantum mechanics and this whole thing about the valence jumps of electrons and this and that, that's sort of, you know, from the Steinerian point of view, that's sort of a subsensible reflection of the supersensible metamorphic action that we see in the plant world. So it's the ability to build these concepts in the consciousness as, like I say, as Steiner said, organs of cognition. That I believe is the essence of Goethe's method. And that's why, well, I was interviewed the other day, and I get on the interview and people start talking about the inner earth, right, the hollow earth, the geocosmos. You know, the interview starts right into that. And it's fun to chat about those things. But I said, well, look, you know, it's interesting, but, you know, a lot of the things you're saying can actually be countered by other ideas in standard physics. So if you want to bring like alternative sciences or alternative thought forward, it's not so much that you want to like bring out these far out ideas, as much fun as they are to think about, but let's take a look at like plant morphology. You know, here you have a plant in the ground, like the roots are kind of generally roundish shaped, and so it's like lunar, and then the stem coming up, that's like the sun. Then the leaves, lower leaves coming up are like Mercury, then Venus, and into the flowers, and then the different effects of the different branchings and things are related to Jupiter, Mars, and Saturn. And I said, you know, because there's no counter in the standard paradigm to say, well, that's wrong because this or that. It's an idea that opens people up and really makes them think. So I believe within that core of Goethean thought, there is the basis for a real resurgence of the science in a living sense. So, yeah, to me, hopefully that answered the question.
Oh, my friend, it opens up so many wonderful possibilities. I think I'll pin you down somewhere else. Freemasonry. I heard somewhere on the internet that certain people felt you were a little too hard on the Freemasons, but I couldn't dig up anything that actually showed you hard on the Freemasons at all. I mean, I personally like them. I think they get an awfully bad press these days. And, you know, since you were in contact with Manly P. Hall. I mean, I'd be very interested in your views about what the Brotherhood actually is and what it does. Let's start with that. What's your opinion on Freemasonry?
Well, I've known a lot of Masons. Most of the ones I've known have actually been, in fact, all the ones I've known that have said they're Masons all seem to be very good, decent people. I've had a friend in Chicago who's like 32nd degree Mason. I said, "Hey, what's the story? You guys taking over the world?" And he laughed. He goes, "Oh man," he goes, "These guys at the top drink too much. They never take it over." He was just kind of kidding. I probably don't even know I should say that stuff. That was just a friend joking years ago. Certainly, I think that, well, originally, I mean, if you go look at the Gothic cathedrals and things like that, somebody really knew something. And if you look at like Scott Onstott's work, Secrets in Plain Sight, you look at like Washington, Baltimore, all these, New York, these things are all online with like Stonehenge and with sacred geometry built in, going back like a couple hundred years now. This stuff's been constant. Somebody behind the scenes knows something and is still building cities and laying stuff out according to this ancient grid and ancient canon of numbers. So that's there. Whether or not that's actually the reflection of the different lodges, it's real hard to say. I've been invited a few times to go into the lodges, but I was never a joiner of anything of any sort. I respect them, let them do their thing. Certainly, there's a lot of people. I mean, if you look at the conspiracies, and like I say, I've been reading conspiracy stuff since the 70s. I had this whole book on secret societies, which I picked up somewhere at a bookshop in the 70s. And you can blame it on everybody, but really, when it comes down to it, it's the bankers of whatever race or nationality or private club they belong to. That's the problem. The international banking is basically running the world as a slave plantation. And, certainly there'd be Masons in there. There won't be, like I say, none of the, and I've actually known good people. I've had neighbors that were, high-ranking Freemasons and stuff, and they were good, honorable people that worked in the community and did things. So, if there's some bad people in there, I don't doubt, there's bad people all over the place. And at the higher levels, it could be, but, there's different strains, there's different things. May or may not be. I'm not that knowledgeable in their inner workings. I've read a lot, but whether or not I should believe what everybody says about them, that's, I keep an open mind. There's a lot of disinformation, misinformation. I like the concept that they have about building the temple. The whole thing about the initiatory process and building the body as the temple through the initiations. That's valid, and that comes from the old mystery schools. That's ancient and predates Freemasonry.
Oh, Thomas, may I just say, extremely well said. I keep going on and on about banking cartels, and I'm shouted down on a regular basis, but I think that's where we have to look at the locus of discord.
Yeah, well, if you look at the laws all over the world, I mean, New Zealand's an interesting place because this is the one place in 1835, the Rangatira, the chiefs of the northern tribes, signed this He Wakaputanga Proclamation of Sovereignty of Sovereign State. And that's actually the only internationally recognized sovereign authority of natives in the world. It's absolutely brilliant. And originally, they signed in 1840 Titiriti o Waitangi with the House of Windsor, basically the Westminster Crown, right? Because as you know, there's a Westminster Crown and the London Crown, and they sort of play the duplicitous game. But there was basically two colonies being set up here. There's a Westminster Crown one up in Northland, and then there was the one in Wellington, which was the New Zealand Company out of London, branch of the East India. They basically took over. So if you look at like the tax laws now, because I'm involved in a matter between Native Hapu that I was adopted into and the commissioner's office, and it says right in the law that that they're acting in a secret, extraordinary jurisdiction. So what in the hell is that? So New Zealand's a special place because the laws are written differently all over the world. I've read through English law, American law, Australian and New Zealand, and a bit of Canadian. And it's different. They try to conceal it differently, but New Zealand is right up at the surface. Look, it's right in there, man. They're operating in a secret, extraordinary jurisdiction. And what we've been able to learn is that the commissioner is always a foreigner here under IMF diplomatic protection because they're basically committing fraud and run the place as a slave plantation. So there is definitely something to all that, and I don't think we can just blame that on Freemasons. The scapegoat is the people you see doing it.
Thomas, more power to your elbow. Very, very well said. Let me drag you back to Freemasonry for one last minute. I mean, I think my experience is roughly the same. Largely, they're good, decent, honourable people with a civic mindset. Do you think it's important to actually go through the rituals to acquire a different type of knowledge? You know, or is the ideology of Freemasonry largely to do with the mind? I mean, I would assume you thought, rather like myself, there was a prescience to ritual undertaking as well, but I'm interested particularly in your view on this matter.
Okay, well, I think that, sure, that is possible, but if we sort of take it from like Steiner's point of view, as he sort of said, the reason that we're here at this sort of discursive point of consciousness where, is because most of us alive now have been incarnating through these diverse civilizations as the sun precessed through the zodiac. That in itself is the initiatory process. It can be quickened through this. And so this is sort of some of my work. This is actually, it gets to the core of my thesis, which is, when I looked at all these things, I've read through a lot of different systems like Zen, and one of my favorites was the Vajrayana, the Tibetans, the mandala research. And I read that stuff for decades, not understanding it, and finally it sort of clicked, and I knew why I was researching it. So what I've been trying to do with my work is sort of present, I've done a couple videos, Quaternity and Dorje Blessing, where I'm trying to bring the pure archetypal forms into a very simple stream and just show, like 20 minutes, just show you the complete overall view of how the thing operates. And that's what I'm working on, the next sort of version of that, where I merge the Goethean color theory and Steinerian ethers with the Vajrayana.
Wow.
Because I figure we're sort of, if we really are at the end of the precessional cycle, all the 2012 stuff, which is actually valid because it's still happening now. There's a major changes obviously happening in the solar system, of which the climate change on Earth is just a small bit. That's just our local thing. But Jupiter's changing, Venus is changing. Venus has slowed down and the atmosphere is sped up and it's gotten brighter. This is all in the last 20, 30 years. There's a lot going on. So I figure, well, the gates of heaven are open. You read like Hamlet's Mill, and they talk about in there, some societies talked about bitter millennia, when the equinoxes and solstices were out of phase with the gates of heaven. And they were waiting for this time, like this most magical time that we're in now. Now we're here, and everybody's like distracted by games and TV and all this stuff. So I figure, well, for me, it was all about the pure archetypal basis, in order. And again, then this gets into the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which fundamentally is the exact same archetypal structure as related to our heart and mind, heart and crown chakra. So overall, we're still dealing with this same structure. And in like the Vajrayana, the Tibetan mandala, you have the four sectors, the one sector in the center. And, like I say, my video Quaternity and Dorje Blessing, I kind of give like a bit of an explanation of quick overview of how the whole system works. But that's actually the old school sort of tracks, we could call it, where the fourth sector, all accomplishing karma-free action, or we could call it going with the Tao, that's green, a dark green. But according to Goethe's theory, that should be violet, which means that the mandala unfolds in a different fashion, which then follows along like a color healing of a system of Dinsha Gadiali, the old spectrochrome. So what I've been trying to do is compress the whole initiatory process into basically 30 to 90 minutes. So even if people don't get it right away, and I picked this up giving lectures because I had bad eyes most of my life. I've got cataract lenses now, so I've actually got better sight. So I used to have to give lectures. Riley Crabb got me lecturing before I took over Borderland, and I'd lecture on sort of like Kabbalah and the Hollow Earth and things like that back in the early 80s. And I couldn't really read my notes and deal with the thing. So I'd get a lot of visual aids. And eventually that got into slides. So I just have some pictures up and talk about it. I thought, wow, this is great. And then I'd get down and I'd always be worried I'd run out of stuff to talk about. So I'd do like a 1-hour talk, and I'd have 120 slides that cover all the different subjects that we talked about here and probably a few more. And I'd basically go through it, and I'd try to lay it out in a certain sort of pattern, like earth, water, air, fire, underlying it, even though that wasn't obvious. And what I noticed at the end of the talks is that everybody was all excited and asked for questions. And it wasn't so much people wanted to question me about what I did, what I said. They wanted to tell me about what it was that opened them up to the bigger sort of picture. So I actually developed it as a theme. So I'd actually intensively just put as many pictures and ideas in certain patterns and flow through and just basically give a banter talk on top just to kind of explain in general what it was. And I realized, and that's what I do. I make these videos I sit there and watch them myself. Like that Dorje Blessing, when I was done with that, I'm sitting there watching it. I watched it dozens of times. I can't believe I even made it. I'm going, wow, this is great. I'm just like imprinting this stuff into my, psychocosmic being. So in that sense, I'm trying to bring the initiatory process into a simple head. And the reason being, I'll get to the point on that, is because like Steiner said, like the task of our civilization, or one of the tasks of our civilization was to dig up like the minerals, release the elementals out of the mineral beds of the earth so that they could begin their path towards conscious evolution. So if you look at like the Tibetan Book of the Dead stuff, right, the only way that your heart and crown chakra system are going to work together is if the initiatory process, whether you've been through some sort of initiatory school or through cycles of civilizations as a sun precess, but that the 4 elemental centers from the Muladhara up to the Hada chakra are all connected. Then the crown heart chakra system starts working, and that's how you build the conscious soul. But if you're not there, then when you die, basically, if some centers are connected, they'll stay connected, and they'll maybe pull in some others out of the elemental sea. But basically, you're pulling out of these 4 sort of elemental seas of earth, water, fire, air. So they've all got to be connected initiatory-wise or experience-wise in the system. So now here we are at the end of the precessional cycle. I figure people just like going to dance parties, having fun, doing all this stuff. So I've worked with sort of DJs and VJs and tried to filter some of these visual ideas into them so that these are actually the images going up, are these like pure archetypal streams of, the ether forms and things. Just to lay sort of the initiatory process into, because if the Zen stuff's true, we should all be able to reach enlightenment in an instant. I wish I had. Still got a bit of a struggle, I think, but at least I know which way to go.
Absolutely fascinating. I'm sure you're very close to it, actually. Thomas. Gosh, Paul, why can't we have hours? It's unfair on Thomas, I know. I know Paul is desperate to get back into this conversation, but I've got to ask one last thing. I mean, I tend to be a joiner as opposed, the opposite side of the equation to you. I like joining things. Although I suppose I've got a nascent allegiance to Wicca. I mean, Wicca's always my base camp. There we are, listeners. I've finally confessed. I see a relation, which I'm hoping to prove in a forthcoming book, between Wicca and deconstruction in the Derridian sense. I don't think we end up with nihilism if we're really doing it properly. I think we end up with something else. That sort of interest has made me very wary of some types of alternative scientific thinking, which seems desperate to justify itself in the vocabulary of mainstream materialistic science. I think you managed to resist that very tempting urge, Thomas. How do you do that? And are you aware consciously of doing that in your work?
Oh, no, definitely. I watch, I get like university courses on video of like quantum mechanics and things like that, because I don't agree with it, but I want to see how they're thinking so I can argue with the people. I believe, because there's a lot of very progressive thinkers out there, and I'm always astonished at how they sort of still adhere to things like black holes and expanding universe. And, this materialistic paradigm is so deeply embedded. And it even gets down to the simple thing of like 3D reality, So I talk about people, 4D, now we're going into 5D now. I go, what are the first 4 dimensions? And I go, well, 3 dimensions of space and time. I go, well, where's the 3 dimensions of space? And they're going out here, height, width, depth. I go, yeah, but you're imposing that. That's a coordinate system. That's not a dimension of space. Because it's not inherent within it. How space is one-dimensional. It's space. It acts projectively on projective geometry. So you have 2 dimensions, space and time. So even I'm thinking, well, how deep are people thinking? And they're out there kind of as like leaders of alternative thought, but yet, going on about black holes, which have pretty much been disproven through the electric universe theories. So people adhere to these little sort of groupings. And I suppose because I don't have any particular sort of paradigm in general I've tried to push other than kind of understanding the mandala patterns and the archetypal patterns of the higher forces forming the plant world and things, like from the Steinerian point of view. But I notice a lot of people, they're sort of dedicated to their terminology and their structure, and they act sort of like prophets or something within there. We won't mention any names to be kind, but but it's quite interesting, and people seem to adhere to that. So a lot of people are still looking for gurus. I believe we're all each other's gurus. This is the Socratic method. This is how we learn, by talking to each other and sharing our ideas and concepts. And David, I think I wanted to throw in something. Just popped in my head again. You mentioned somebody that worked in World War II with the color stuff.
Yeah. He was my occult teacher, Jesse Thompson.
Okay, interesting. Well, see, there's this other guy. I mentioned Trevor Constable. One of his teachers was a guy, Rick Mansell. And Rick worked in he was in the war room there in London during the war, and he was an expert in camouflage. Through that, he got into Goethe's theory, which got him into Steiner. And he spent the last 25 years of his life retranslating Steiner's work, which was never published. But I used to have copies of a lot of the tapes that he did. And they were actually, he redid all the scientific work and stuff. So was my background, is I got to listen to a couple hundred of those lectures years ago. But just wanted to throw that in as another connection. It was interesting.
Oh, my friend, I'm beginning to realize we've got so many connections, it's nearly uncanny. I'm going to ask you one sneaky last question before Obertelli pushes back in. Why can't German scholars just come out and say what they mean?
Rick Mansell used to say that on the tape. He'd be going on. He goes, well, blah. He'd be trying to translate, and he'd go, wait a minute. He goes, guy. He goes, this bloody German. He goes, this is what he's trying to say, and he would say it very simply. Good question, but I have much respect for that discursive point of view.
Oh, my friend, I mean, nobody's doubting the brilliance of German scholarship, but my heavens, come out and say it. Paul, this enchanting man is yours for a while.
Thank you very much. No, it's great listening. Thomas, getting a little bit personal, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask you, do you actually have your own religion? Are you a religious person yourself?
No, I suppose the closest I would sort of come to anything is I would say through the Tibetan Vajrayana. But in that sense, I don't really consider myself a Buddhist because, I don't think Buddha would have been a Buddhist at all. So I suppose spiritual more than religious, although I was raised kind of strict Catholic. I probably believed that stuff when I was young just because it was embedded in me. But I remember having a conversation with my father when I was a teenager, probably about 15 or 16, and I was reading, Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Evans Wentz translations, Tibetan Yoga and Secret Doctrines. And my father, Frank Brown, he was the chairman of the College of Commerce at DePaul University in Chicago and head of the economics department. So, brilliant professor, very good man. Obviously, always mates with the cardinal, got pictures of him with the popes and stuff. Very well-placed Catholic. I remember asking him, I said, well, do you really believe this stuff? He goes, well, obviously, he said, there's obviously some sort of divine spiritual nature of things. He said, but as far as the story, Christian story, he goes, I don't know. He says, it's good. He said, it's a good social institution. He said, keeps people together so you can educate them properly, because if people aren't educated, he said, then we're going to be overrun by a horde of uneducated barbarians. So he viewed it as a social institution. But I'd like to, and I suppose I come from the same thing, right? There is a divine spiritual nature to things. If some particular, dogmatic stream gives you comfort, and that's the gateway with which you connect, then I've got respect for that. So, I'll respect anybody's religion if, they're practicing it in not harming others. But as for myself, I'm just purely into right now trying to understand color theory, the mandala, and the ethers and their interconnections. And I suppose it's sort of a metaphysical, physical sort of spiritual thing.
Yeah, I mean, I come from the same slice of pie as David. I'm also pagan, and I mean, my view is the more spiritual paths and religions there are, the better. I think there's a bit too much of, oh, we're right, no, we're right. One has to be right, one's the truth, and so on. Whereas I think basically that the more options there are, the more inviting it is to people, and the more chance there is of someone finding spirituality themselves, because that's the most important thing, is someone finds a spiritual connection with something, rather than all this fussing around that people worried that they might be wrong.
Oh, absolutely. Because I've had a lot of friends in Wicca and things over the years. Like I say, I've known a lot of people into a lot of different things. And I would say for the most part, the reason they were into it was just basically a love of nature, love of natural energies. Was never really people picture it some sort of like dark sort of sorcery thing. I've never really I have run across people like that, like out San Francisco way and stuff. But in general, no, I haven't. And I've got friends that are like, I would say, really good Christians, and they practice it and they believe it. Yeah. And if they can find that sort of inner, I understand the concept of the of the inner Christ. To me, in that sort of, or the cosmic Christ, like in the Steinerian sense. If that's how you want to perceive the archetype, I'm totally congruent with that. It may not really my terminology, but yet I find nothing wrong with it. But I say everybody's got their own gateway, and we're all sort of because theoretically nothing should exist, right? We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't be able to talk. But yet here we are with these sort of creative intelligences trying to discern what the nature of reality is. And either if you have nothing, the opposite of that would be everything. So obviously all these different ideas and experiences need to be explored. And we're all just each our own individual sort of nodal sort of, sensory node of creation in this process, and that's why I say, to me, it doesn't matter what people believe; it's how they act. If they act in honor, if they act with respect towards other people, towards life, it doesn't matter what, I don't care if you're Muslim, Catholic, Wicca, Buddhist. It's, to me, they're all the same, because it's what's in the person's heart and mind and how they act.
Yeah, judge a tree by its fruits. Yeah,
exactly.
I've heard you go into the Venus signature before. When you cut an apple in half and you can see it there, and obviously that matches up to the five-pointed star that you get in Wicca. I think even in Freemasonry you see it, the Golden Dawn, and lots of other sort of pagan movements and groups that use it. What are your views on the origins of that? And do you think it is very relevant to the Venus signature, or is it something different? Or
Oh, no. Well, totally. Well, basically, if you look into sacred geometry, if you kind of go through it in like the sense of the quadrivium, where you're dealing with sort of, the first phase of the quadrivium of, numbers in their pure form. The number 5, we say, we spell it with an F, but it really should be PHIVE5, for the phi ratio, which basically the pentagram is part of the unfolding of the golden ratio. It's just part of the natural order of things. That's the true metric, like we were talking about, 3D space. Space is one-dimensional.
Yeah.
Like a cylinder, you only need radius and length, so that's only two-dimensional. But fundamentally, there is a basic nature of space. Wherever there's living forms where the discharge of energy, as long as it's living energy, it always comes off in some sort of Fibonacci or golden ratio sort of form. So that is. So, yeah, the pentagram is, without a doubt, our bodies are kind of formed on that whole basic mathematics. It's interesting that the Earth-Venus orbital relationship contains that. It's a 5 to 8 relationship with the 5-pointed star occurring over 8 years. So it is fundamental to our nature, and it weaves into the plant life. This is one of the things with Steiner's stuff, the anthropocentric universe, is that there is a higher order we are the center of the universe as far as our life body. It's like, in a computer, you got your virtual world where you can run around, you have all these things. Well, basically, the life body of the Earth is a virtual world. We are in the center. It's all projected out of probably the galactic center. If you follow sort of like John Lash's work on the Sophia, sort of. Are you familiar with his work?
No, I'm not sure if David is.
Oh, okay. That's something to look into. He might be an interesting guy for you guys to interview.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Because of his work about reconstructing the old Sophia Gnostic sort of story, it's very accurate, very brilliant, very far-seeing, but it also dovetails with sort of the advanced sort of paradigm changes as per the electric universe and Halton Arp's work and discordant galaxies and, discordant redshifts and connected galaxies and things. So we're starting to see a merging of sort of ideas along those lines between the physics and the metaphysics. And I forgot the point of where we were going with that there, Paul.
No, that was a good bit of freestyle there from it. I mean, it was basically the Venus signature and the Wicker sign, the 5-pointed star, and that is just basically the origin of that. Is it still relevant to it, do you think, from what it originally meant, or has it just evolved into different things now and people just use this 5-pointed star to mean whatever, whatever it means to them?
Well, they may not understand, but subconsciously it's always going to connect as a fundamental archetype. So that's the attraction, whether or not the people using it actually fully understand. I sort of had a vision in meditation years ago of I've been reading all these different Eastern and Western systems and stuff. And it was almost like I could see this like fundamental archetype of everything, basically based on sort of the mandala and Goethe's theory. That was when I started putting that stuff together, probably about 18 years ago. But I started seeing how it was almost like a geological formation, wherever it like outcropped, different parts of it would outcrop, and sort of dogmatic religious sort of theories would like form around it, right? But nowhere was the whole thing sort of outcropping. So I think now we're at the time where the whole thing can outcrop, just get to the fundamental archetypes. And this golden ratio stuff, like with the pentagram, there's a lot of interesting work. Like I said, there's this guy, Scott Onstott, did the Secrets in Plain Sight. And there's a guy on Facebook, Joe Dubs, D-U-B-S, probably not his real name, but he's doing all this amazing little diagrams of all the sacred geometric relationships, which a lot of it goes back. First, I saw on John Michel's work, where he shows like Earth and the Moon relationship. So it's like this whole squaring the circle, golden section forms the pyramid. There's so much of this intertwining. I wish I had the mind and the intellect to absorb. I know a lot about a lot of stuff because I've known a lot of people and I can make a lot of connections, but to actually delve deeply in and get your head around some of these things, I wish I had a team of people to work with on this that we could just kind of like, if you get some like major funding and put together a team just to kind of produce these things and produce videos, just simple explanations, that would be my vision where to go.
It's same old thing as the money. It's always the money in it. That's the thing. I'm surprised there's not been more people that have like chosen to invest money into this kind of research and to bring it out there more and to do more with it.
Well, I've had. I actually had a few years ago. I had some guy who claimed to be a billionaire wanted to fund me, and we kind of explained to him a lot of this stuff and showed him equipment, showed him basically Trevor, all this and that, and he got sort of conned by some other guy and went and poured all his money into some other guy who's running around the world now giving talks using like terms from old physics and stuff. So I sort of, because he was sort of a charismatic sort of schmoozer, and I was just telling straight because I didn't care if I got money or not. I just was interested in the truth.
Is that a name you're unable to mention, is it?
At this point, yeah. Maybe private. I think it's for fun.
Fair enough. David, we're sort of getting towards that time. Have you got anything else you'd like to chime in with?
The first thing I'd like to say is don't get us into any libelous actions.
Yeah, there was a name that came to my head when you mentioned the DVD and that whatnot, but I'll keep that quiet.
No, in all respect to them. I mean, let people do their thing and have their fun. It was just I didn't win. But the point was that I spent like 6 months writing this guy reports and doing all that, and then was just like left hanging without even a response. And then it was clear where the cash went to somebody else. And I thought, well, whatever. That's the nature of reality.
Yeah, lots of business people tend to like leaving people hanging and messing them about, unfortunately. And the annoying thing is they normally make a lot of money doing it, which is annoying.
Well,
Exactly.
Let me dive in quickly. John Lash, what an amazing man. That's another discussion at some point, I think. Steiner, obviously we've got to end on Steiner today. I sense in Steiner's work a very personalist interpretation of the cosmos, of life, reality. I mean, for me, existential thought is mind-blowing, but it always seems to fall down on solutions. It's very good at the analysis of what the problem is, but it always seems to me to fall down on any sort of what do we do about that, whereas personalism seems to pick up the baton at that point and say, well, hang on, this is what we do. Do you have a stance on personalist and impersonalist vocabularies? Do you sense that in Steiner, and what's your own position?
Well, I found a lot of good in Steiner. I didn't actually go along with all of it, partly because I didn't penetrate all of it. But what I found what was important in Steiner was his scientific works, but mostly the natural scientific work of the Goetheanum. Those people that sort of grew out of that: Rudolf Hauschka, Lily Kalisko, Theodor Schwenk. What they actually showed, if you put all those pieces together, there's a phenomenal science in there. But the thing is it's hard. It's never really been put into one really big package and put out to people as a complete paradigm. So people just see little bits of it here and there, and it's hard to bring it in. So, right, it really depends sort of on, it is a personal thing, I think. I've learned you can't really go out and wake up the world. You can shake people and, tell them something, and it's like, well, if they want to believe it, they will. If they don't, it's only through experience do we understand these things. And, that's why I promote people getting prisms and looking through them. And, because I believed the Newtonian theory till I picked up a prism and looked through it. And, it's like instantly realized how wrong I was for most of my life to that point. So the actual experience, allows things, so I suppose I believe more in the impersonal sort of sense of things, which would be kind of a Freemasonic sort of perspective, if you want to look at it, because they believe in like the impersonal sort of divinity, the architect, and that's why you have to build the reflection within yourself through the initiatory process. So I say, in general, I go along with that, but I still believe that there is this divine overall oneness in the objective. And then that boils down to, well, the Vajrayana, you're basically at the point of the subjective-objective interface. The 8th step of the 9 steps of the old Nyingma sort of method, right? The next one is the Dzogchen, where you reach enlightenment, where you got to get around the mandala and connect. So I found basically I can credit Steiner with giving me the insight to get through the mandala and understand it, but then I had to correct it in order to fit, the way I had come through myself. And whether or not that's personal for me or that will apply to other people, I suppose that will depend on the reaction to the next video I get out where I point that stuff out. We'll see what people think.
Oh, Thomas, riveting, engaging. I could literally talk the night away to you, but I think Obertelli's going to tell me off.
Well, we're just about at that time. You are actually our final interview for 2014, Thomas. So, Thomas, excuse me, Thomas. It's been a great one to round up the year on, and we hope to see you back in 2015.
Oh no, Paul and David, thank you guys both, man. I love these conversations. So, I mean, even if you want to talk longer sometime and it's not being recorded, I don't care. Just give me a call. You got my Skype.
Brilliant. So, that's really appreciate that.
And if I can think of any other fun guests for you, I'll certainly let you know as well. But I would definitely say check out John Lash. He's a fascinating man.
Brilliant. Well, we'll certainly take up your advice there. Great. Thanks again. And we'll speak soon.
All right. Hey, Happy New Year's to both of you guys. Thank you very much.
And to you,
Happy New Year, Thomas. Take care.
Cheers. Bye.
that was Thomas Joseph Brown. That was intriguing, wasn't it, David?
I think intriguing. You know, I hate overusing superlatives, but sometimes they're called for. It genuinely was intriguing. Yeah. A man of great knowledge, great intellect, and a true gentleman.
Yeah, it's again, it's these subjects that you just want to sort of chat for hours. And we'll definitely be getting Thomas back on the show, and I think we've got to try and hopefully he'll be a regular, which I think he will. He's an easygoing guy and was great to work with previous to the show. And thanks again for the recommendation to our listener Ryan for getting him on the show.
Well, I confess I'm still picking my jaw back off the floor because I didn't realise quite how much we had in common. And we've also got links in various areas of research. It's quite uncanny. What a weird way to end the year.
Absolutely. And that is it. This is the last show for 2014. I've got a week now that I'm going to sit down and prepare all the interviews for 2015. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them for 2015. I should imagine in that time I should probably have a beer or two as well. And I hope that you guys have a great New Year's party and that you all have a fantastic 2015. And David, is there anything you'd like to say in this final 2004 show?
I'll get horribly drunk. I'm not sure I'm joining you this year because I got too much on my mind, but I may. You never know. No, I mean, you know, life's for living. Embrace as I keep saying, the pagan in yourself, the divine in yourself. Enjoy. You know, the world is not a perpetual nightmare, and don't believe those people that keep telling you it is.
Stay positive, folks. For those of you who may have had a bad year, have a better year in 2015. Those of you who had a good year, have another good year in 2015. Take care.
Happy New Year and chowsy chowsy.